In today's film study, we're going to look at the psychological thriller Renapal, written and directed by John Stevenson. Now how does that sound?
Sounds fucking weird, Andy.
A strange VHS tape allows a lonely bachelor named David to find companionship with Andy, its charming and charismatic host. However, Andy's friendship comes at a cost, and David desperately struggles to afford the price of admission. Now this film is unlike anything I've ever seen, so I appreciate the creativity that comes with this premise. It's an idea that stems from a real-life creepy VHS tape titled Renapal, which was released in 1987 and made for lonely singles with VCR sets who needed that extra bit of companionship in their lives. In terms of comparing this film to something else, I think of a demented version of the Joaquin Phoenix film Her, or even the 2019 Joker. So basically something that Joaquin Phoenix would star in, but it doesn't star him. Instead, it stars Brian Falkins as our lead character, who much like the Joker, falls into that category of one bad day away from being a maniacal monster. I mean, he's a single, middle-aged, overweight man who's been forced into the situation where his full-time job is caring for his dementia-riddled mother, all while barely scraping by off her social security.
It's enough to make anyone crazy.
But while there's no crazy clown here, we do get a really messed up version of Mr. Rogers from Wil Wheaton. I mean, you can't say Dr. Sheldon Cooper didn't try and warn us. But let's talk about Andy. The purpose of this character is to fill that companionless void of the outcast, to be that helpful little push to get you through the hardships of life. But with Andy, there's something sinister lurking just beneath that otherwise wholesome vest. Because not only is he also lonely like the audience he was intended for, but even worse, he's incredibly insecure, and you see it in the stories he tells. You can see the cracks in the armor, so to speak. He exhibits predatory behavior in the way he explicitly talks about women from his past. There's history of abuse from his parents that he also reciprocates through his controlling language, and because of all this baggage, the Renapal system cannot work. Rather, it's the perfect storm for someone like David to fall susceptible to Andy's emotional manipulation. We actually see this play out when Andy guilts David into canceling his date with Lisa. And while I do sympathize with David sort of being a victim of circumstance, he still fumbled the bag all on his own. I mean, he took a complete 180 from his initial reason for visiting the matchmaking video company, which was to find himself a woman who would understand his situation and love him for who he seemed to be. We get a glimpse during his initial tape recording of a kind-hearted, caring, and thoughtful guy who'd just been dealt a crappy card. But as we come to find out, there was already some conflicting deviance within him, which gets hinted at in multiple occasions throughout the film. We see it when he laughs at Andy's remarks about not being some crazed maniac. His insecurities are easily detectable with the stories he tells Andy, like where his lack of trust stems from as a result of cruel grade school bullying. There's definitely some unresolved trauma with his father's suicide, and then there's some foreshadowing with Lisa telling him that he needs to find balance for his particular situation, otherwise he'll begin to grow resentment towards his mother, which he ultimately does. But let's dive deep. I mean, what truly gets David from first greeting Andy like this?
I'm here to be your friend. How's that sound?
Oh, sounds great, Andy.
To then being completely dependent on him like this.
Andy, I need Andy!
Well, I don't know anyone named Andy.
Renapal! I need Renapal!
It's simple. It's easy to fool people when they're already fooling themselves. After all, the VHS taped Andy who talks back and forth with David isn't sentient. Rather, he's a reflection of all the darkness already present in David. And we see a lot of those terrible traits reveal themselves as we near the end of the film, like his abuse toward his mother. David never breaks the cycle of abuse. He instead repeats it, much like his word-for-word repetition of the Renapal tape when he's confronted by Lisa after just throwing his poor mother down the stairs, which is such a disturbing scene as we're left to listen to her haunting and agonizing cries for help. And again, this isn't a possession of David, but it's him embracing his inner Andy, so to speak, and it's highlighted so wonderfully through the sound design as well. If you pay close enough attention to the final sequence, we can hear Andy's voice as you'd expect to hear it, sort of static-like and coming from the speakers.
When all the chips are down. And that's why I'm here for you, pal.
But then there's an audible switch where Andy's voice can be heard clear as day, as if he's physically occupying the same space.
We're going to get to know each other. We're going to talk about whatever you want. But more than anything, we're going to have some fun.
It's like little glitches in the matrix of David's spiraling mind, culminating in a lasagna-covered fight to the death, in which he thankfully loses after taking a knife to the abdomen, courtesy of Lisa. And as he stumbles past his mother's deceased body to take one last slump on the couch as his Renapal tape plays, I can't help but think of one of the final things he said to her, which was that she took everything from him, when in reality, as he listens to the closing comments from Andy, it dawns that while he didn't have much material-wise, he did still have plenty of care to offer others and himself, but instead, he tossed it all away because he couldn't face his reality in a constructive manner and fell victim to his undealt with demons. Overall, Renapal serves as a cautionary tale, for men especially, to our unwillingness to acknowledge and tenderly treat our mental health whenever life has us down, because burying everything deep down and losing yourself to heavy media consumption instead of putting personal time aside and admitting you need help will only lead to a catastrophic eruption. And no, I'm not talking about the kind that David had listening to Wil Wheaton's voice. Bazinga. But this brings us to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this film study, I've got plenty more on the channel, and I also cover film and TV news, so consider joining the journey and subscribing to the channel. I've been Millennium Movies. I will see you all very soon.